98 cartbars, 86 mounds opened, and one anonymous accusation that buried all of it for 140 years. The accusation has been repeated ever since as though it were a finding. It was never tested, and the men who made it took care that it never could be. So this film begins where the record begins, and not where the rumor begins. So begin with the ground. Garden Creek lies on the Pigeon River near Canton, in Haywood County, North Carolina. Whether or not a single disputed carving is ancient, this is a native ceremonial and mortuary landscape. That conclusion is carried by excavation. It does not need the argument. The research laboratories of archaeology catalog for these sites records 17,600 lots, 422,000 individual items, 148 categories. 3/4 of it comes from one site number, 31 Haywood 1, mound number 1. 318,000 potsherds, 39,000 pieces of animal bone, 261 lots of pipes, 67 of beads, 41 gorgets, 28 lots of cut mica. This is not a thin site. It is one of the most heavily excavated landscapes in western North Carolina. And it is not one moment. 3 of the 4 determinations from enclosure number 1, its ditch fills and a rock-filled post hole, calibrate together to roughly the first 2 centuries of the Common Era. Mound number 2's construction follows in the 2nd through 4th. Mound number 1 is a different sequence entirely. Paired semi-subterranean earth lodges, joined by a passage, burned, then buried under later mound stages, roughly 1280 to 1414. More than 1,000 years separate the 2 monuments. This place was not built once. It was returned to and made sacred again. The 4th determination is the one that has done the damage. 411 plus or minus 38 radiocarbon years before present from the top of the ditch fill at the base of the plow zone. Subtract from 1950 and it reads 1539, the year before DeSoto. So calibrated properly against NCal 20, it does not resolve to one range at all. It splits into 2 branches. The larger runs from about 1427 to 1523 and carries nearly 74% of the probability. The smaller runs from 1572 to 1630 and carries 21. Which means the figure this project has been carrying, approximately 1570 to 1630, is not the calibration of this sample. It is the smaller branch, quoted on its own, with 3/4 of the distribution left out. That is not a miscalculation. It is a truncation. And the curve holds one more irony. 1540, the year of the entrada, falls in the gap between the 2 branches, the narrow stretch where this date is least likely to sit. The naive subtraction and the truncated range are both wrong, and they are wrong in the opposite directions. The context still governs. The sample came from the base of the plow zone, so it dates disturbance rather than construction. But that disturbance now reads late pre-contact, 15th century into the early 16th, and the contact period question at Garden Creek no longer rests on it. Who truncated the range is a separate question, and it is not settled here. The arithmetic is reproducible. The chain of custody for the quoted figure is not. Check the printed table and its caption before an adverse finding is entered against anyone's name. The federal inventories settle the sacred landscape question on their own. Mound number 1, 26 individuals, 738 associated funerary objects. Mound number 2, 9 individuals, 50 objects. Shell ornaments, shell beads, shell dipper fragments, stone discs, pelts, hover. These are ancestors, not illustrations. Everything that follows runs through consultation with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and other descendant communities and through NAPRA handling of every record and every image. Now the objects. The collecting chain begins before the controversy, and that sequence matters more than anything said afterward. In 1879, and again in 1880, the Valentine side asked Osborne to record where each piece was found and to send a ticket with it. Highland, low meadow, river wash, gray mountain. The exhibition album ledger records material, fine spot condition, and numbered photographs across 156 rows. It also records its own failures, entries marked no ticket, and one class labeled in the collector's own hand, imitations. A collection that labels its own fakes is not behaving like a forgery operation. It is behaving like a mixed collection. December 1880, Benjamin Valentine writes that a Cherokee man, identified as Chief Bushy Head of Macon County, said that such images were found in the western mountains, and that medicine men used them to bring rain. The letter carries its own caution. The writer says plainly that he may have misunderstood, and later Kuala accounts record the opposite. No knowledge of these images at all. That conflict is preserved here. It is not resolved. And before the accusation is weighed, look at what the Valentines were actually doing. 86 mounds opened, named landholders, named creeks, permissions asked for and recorded, hunters and crews paid by the day, finding their own tools and their own board. Tickets requested with every piece, highland, low meadow, river wash, grave, mound, beginning in 1879, 4 years before anyone alleged anything at all. A ledger that records its own gaps, marks entries no ticket, and files a class of its own material as imitations. And find spots that hold. Number 61 binds to Jasper Allen Mound across 2 records, and the object class carries over the balsam divide into a second drainage. That is a field operation. It is not a forgery ring. Forgery rings do not request provenance in 1879, and they do not catalog their own fakes. 1883, John W. Emmert arrives in western North Carolina for the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology, sent to establish whether the Valentine carvings are ancient or modern. On the 11th of April, he writes to Cyrus Thomas from Asheville. He has spent several days on Mount Pisgah and laid out one night on it by himself, and, his words, failed to find any of the specimens described by Mr. Valentine. 6 days later, he writes again. One of the men who wanted to furnish his relics was at the post office when Thomas's letter arrived. Emmert told him, and this is the sentence that matters, that he wanted some of his skillful work, that you would not know the difference. He asks for $30 by return mail. He will take a receipt for the amount paid for each piece, and on the 25th he reports success. I have had a hard lot of men to deal with, but have succeeded in getting your specimens made. So the objects held up for a century as proof that the Valentine corpus was fake were commissioned, specified, and paid for by the bureau that was investigating it. The scale never matched either. Emmert relayed an anonymous claim of more than $2,000 paid out for relics. The verified remittance subset totals roughly $215 to $220. And the receipts will not hold either. The sub-voucher for the soapstone images carries the same hand for pay and for payer. 3 copies survive, each certified a true copy by the disbursing agent. Man Valentine's own inquiry of 1886 records the obvious difficulty, that Mary Burdick could not read or write and so could not have signed it. Then the door was closed. In May of 1883, Spencer Baird writes to Emmert, "Under no circumstances will your name be mentioned." 3 years later, Emmert confirms it. "I promised them positively that their names should not be known, and you assured me at the time that they should not." The makers were guaranteed permanent anonymity by the institution that used them, which means the central claim of the fraud case was made, by design, permanently untestable. And in 1894, Cyrus Thomas published that Emmert had been entirely successful. Emmert had written that he was entirely unsuccessful. Thomas had dismissed him in 1887 for conduct, and taken him back in 1889. 2025, 8 objects sampled for thermoluminescence. 2 zones returned to last firing within roughly the last century. 6 were too insensitive to date at all. Read that precisely. 2 adverse zones are real, and they have to be carried. But they are 2 sampled zones, not 2 objects, and not a corpus. And until every sample location is mapped against every repair and consolidant, they cannot be read as a verdict on anything beyond themselves. 6 returned nothing at all. The material itself is still unsettled. Steadite, soapstone, hotstone, clay, fired ceramic. These are visual labels. They are not mineralogy. So heat has to be tiered. Low-fired earthenware, roughly 5 to 800 degrees. Talc breaking down toward instatite from about 800. Vitrification above that. True clinker, higher still. And that tiering is what finally tests the old boast that a fresh carving could be aged in iron-rich water. Ferruginous water will stain a surface. It cannot build a thermal phase inside the stone. Here is the sharpest open question in the file. Search the excavated catalog for the disputed corpus's own kind, and you do find it. Figurines, 15 lots. Effigies, 10. 1 carved object, 1 mask, 1 lot recorded as cut steatite, and soapstone, carried as a material rather than a category, runs to 87 lots in the county holdings. Call it roughly 30 lots of image-bearing carved stone, retained across a century of controlled excavation. Set that against a disputed corpus of more than 900 carved objects. This is not absence, and it is not proof of fraud. It is a scale mismatch, and even that has to be said carefully, because the excavated catalog is weighted to one county, while the collecting campaign reached across the county line. Compare like with like, and the gap narrows. It does not close. The imagery is why anyone looks at all. 98 pairs, seated, kneeling, and standing humans, birds, wolves, bison, turtles, pipes, and paired figures. So take the archive as it is actually filed. 1,138 images, sorted into the categories the project uses. Animal figures, 418, the largest class in the archive and the least resolved. Human figures, 318, seated, kneeling, standing, some crowned, some cross-hatched from shoulder to foot. Bears, 97, upright, quadruped, recumbent, seated on platforms. Vessels and bowls, 42. Pipes, 14. Geometric marked, 19. And 157 filed under a single word, unresolved. That last number is the honest one. It is the part of the archive that has not yet been made to answer to a catalog number, a fine spot, or a material. Smithsonian Negative A 082450 is the strongest label anchor in the set. A crouched bare person, angular muzzle, an open arch through the body, dense incision. Probable Valentine comparators 600 and 609 share the posture, the negative space, and the geometry of the snout. Cross-hatching covers some bodies systematically. It is design, not damage. It is also one of the most widespread geometric devices human beings have ever made. By itself, it dates nothing and identifies no one. The humped animal stays genuinely open, camelid-like, composite, post-contact, copied, or fabricated. The Rixeye map does not authenticate it. And here the film has to correct itself. The crown vessel was carried in this record as unestablished. Components scattered across the catalog. A bowl ringed with figures here. A crown like ridge there, but no combined image. That was wrong. London album number 61. Material, steedate, note, ball, and a fine spot that is, in this ledger, a rarity. A named mound, Jasper Allen Mound, near present-day Silva, in Jackson County. Of roughly 90 numbered ledger entries, almost every one carries a collecting tag. Burnett Hill, Millard Hill, near Pisgah, Pigeon River. Only number 61 and the Wells and McCombs series name a mound. On the 14th of December, 1881, Osborne writes to Valentine from Scotts Creek, 5 miles north of Webster. He has permission from Mr. Jasper Allen to open a mound on his farm, 46 feet across. And days later, in the same letter, he describes what he is lifting out of it. The image of a man with a crown upon his head, and a jug-shaped vessel with the images of 4 persons extended from it, 3 crowned heads and 1 head not crowned. So the crown vessel is not an outside rumor and not an unverified comparandum. It is described in a dated field letter from a named and excavated mound inside the collecting campaign itself. What remained open is narrower, and it should be stated precisely. The letter is the record of the object. No photograph in the archive has yet been bound to that description, and the ledger's own bowl number 61 is not claimed to be it. The fine spot also moves the problem. Jasper Allen Mound lies about 23 miles from Garden Creek in a straight line, 35 by road, over the Balsam Mountains. Different county, different drainage. The Tuckasegee running south toward the Little Tennessee, while Garden Creek runs north toward the French Broad. Carved steatite recorded on both sides of that divide, in one collecting season, is a regional distribution. It is the hardest single fact in this file for a one-workshop story to absorb. It does not prove antiquity. The same network worked both slopes, but it widens the ground the corpus has to be judged against. 2 readings still have to be checked against the originals. Entry 086A is a transcription stream, not yet collated against the manuscript, and the name Jasper Allen is the load-bearing word in the whole match. and the ledger says Silva, a town not incorporated until 1889, so the ledger entry was written down later than the letter, until it can be shown to carry a detail the correspondence does not. These are two records. They are not yet two independent ones. There is a further proposal in this file, and it deserves to be stated properly rather than waved past, that these carved images are Dudumaq Anishinaabe clan markers. Dudum signs are real, and they are not decoration. Bear, crane, loon, marten, catfish, deer. They were drawn as signatures on treaty documents, incised on birch bark, and set above graves. A clan mark is a legal and ceremonial instrument, and the proposal has a genuine historical hook. Clan identity governs marriage through exogamy. In 1883, the Code of Indian Offenses moved against native ceremony and marriage rite. In the same year that agents arrived at Pisgah, a corpus that encoded clan and marriage would have had a reason to be discredited. But three things bound the reading. Garden Creek is Appalachian summit ground, some 800 miles from the Anishinaabe homeland. The list offered in support is a list of object types: axes, pipes, bowls, hoe blades, not a list of clan animals. And a bear carved in North Carolina is not evidence of a bear dudum until placement, pairing, and context are read together. The project's own weighted scorecard already says as much. MV Skoke, Yuchai, and Cherokee rank first as southeastern comparators. Anishinaabe and Osage sit further out as broader symbolic parallels, so the Dudumaq reading belongs on the latter at comparative only, a frame worth testing, not a finding. And this is where the rule matters most. Garden Creek is eastern band of Cherokee Indians' ancestral ground. A cultural label fixed to this corpus from outside consultation is not a finding. It is a claim made about somebody else's ancestors. So the corpus is mixed, in the way that every large 19th century collection is mixed. Ancient, historic period native, Robert, miscatalogued, and a few documented imitations that the collectors themselves flagged. That is not a scandal. That is what a collection looks like. And no object inherits a verdict, not from the mound it came out of, and not from an accusation made against the object beside it. 943 image-bearing catalog rows, 1,138 photographic files, 156 ledger entries. The crosswalk that would bind them is still incomplete. That is the work. Complete the photographic catalog concordance. Obtain the full thermoluminescence data and map every sample against every repair. Verify the reported clinker at the figurine locus by provenience and by analysis. Recover the missing spring letters of 1883. Resolve the Wells Mound records. Audit the lead and metal objects by exact context. And do every part of it inside consultation. So the finding is this: the fraud verdict on the Garden Creek and Mount Pisgah corpus is not supported by the record, and it should be retired. It rests on a single compromised chain, an agent who could not find the objects and commission replacements instead, witnesses guaranteed they would never be named, a receipt written in one hand, and a published claim that reverses what the file actually says. The landscape is native and sacred. The collecting record is real, and it is better documented than the accusation ever was. The objects are native material, out of a documented campaign across 86 mounds. What remains is not an indictment. It is ordinary archaeology, age, hand, and material resolved object by object in consultation with the people whose ancestors made them.